And I will welcome everyone to the World Beyond War book club on Dissent, Voices of Conscience, a book that Susan Dixon and I wrote back in 2006 and 7, and then it actually was published in 2008. And this is a book series of 4 sessions. This is our 3rd session. In our first session, we had several of the diplomats who resigned in opposition to the war on Iraq, because this book is about the people in the US government that spoke out against wars on Iraq and issues in Afghanistan. And it cut off in 2007. But as we well know, there are tons and tons more whistleblowers that have let us know what the government's doing since then. Our very first session, we had Brady Kiesling, who was one of the 3 diplomats, along with myself, that resigned in opposition to the war in Iraq. And we also had First Lieutenant Aaron Watada, who refused to go to Iraq. Our second session, we focused on civilian whistleblowers in our government, and we had Colleen Rowley, who was a FBI whistleblower who sent a 13-page dynamic memo to the director of the FBI saying, "You guys in Washington prevented us field offices from investigating the guys that were actually learning how to fly the planes that eventually went into the buildings in 9/11. And also Jesslyn Radak of the Department of Justice, who was a whistleblower on the Department of Justice doing, how do you say it, not abiding by the law and the evidence presented in the case of Johnny Walker Lynn, the American Taliban. And today, now we're focusing on whistleblowers and or men and women who challenged the US government's wars and challenged them in ways that brought difficulty to themselves in terms of they ended up in jail. 2 of them ended up in jail because they refused to do any more killing. And we really appreciate their witness, their acts of courage. We have Kevin Benderman, who is with us, and Ricky Clousing. We also have with us Jeff Paterson, who was a war resister from Gulf War I. So we didn't put him in the book, we should have, but Jeff refused to go to Gulf War I. In fact, here in Hawaii, he sat down in the tarmac and wouldn't let the plane that was supposed to take the gang off. And since then, he has been a key leader in the support for all the war resistors that we've had. So today we'll be talking with all 3 of these fine people and hearing more about their decisions and what has, what transpired, how their lives have sorted out since then. We're going to start with Jeff Paterson and ask him, from his experience with Courage to Resist, to kind of give us a background on how many people Courage to Resist has helped during these last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and some of the details of how you help people who get in touch saying, I don't like what I'm doing in the military and I need some advice and assistance, or I've already made my decision. I'm not staying in the military. I've gone AWOL, and now what do I do? So Jeff, we thank you very much, and please give us your thoughts.
Well, thanks, Ann. What are my thoughts? It's been a long 30 years for me, I guess, since the Gulf War. And numbers, Courage to Resist has probably directly supported about 50 military objectors, meaning 50 people that have faced actual legal consequences, court martials and legal defense fees. That's a relatively small number, but sort of the sort of a self-selection of those, thousands of people who went AWOL and the hundreds of people, who spoke out, and then the dozens that really faced serious consequences. So for the vast majority of these cases, we're collaborating with the GI Rights Hotline or the Center for Conscience and War in DC, helping, conscientious objectors get honorable discharges and get out without going to prison. But for some of the, for some of the more outspoken people, that becomes not an option. And a lot of times the military makes it very clear that, if you keep your mouth shut and go along with the program, then maybe you won't have to deploy, and maybe you'll get out down the road. So that's always something that a lot of people weigh, and that's a hard decision to make, right? If you have a family that's depending on you, and or whether you really need those health benefits for the rest of your life, if you're dealing with some military injuries and traumatic stress from those experiences. So I don't know if that's helpful, but Courage Resist. We actually, well, I helped found Courage Resist 2005-ish, in part because of people like Kevin Benderman, who was facing a military court-martial at the same time as Stephen Funk, who was from the Bay Area. So that got me and a few other people thinking, wow, there's these two, very outspoken people challenging the Iraq War. Maybe there is a basis for an organization to support those people instead of doing one campaign at a time. So that's sort of the beginning of Courage to Resist.
Well, and the Courage to Resist, it really took the bull by the horns, and it was your leadership that really mobilized such great citizen outpouring in like when Aaron Watada decided not to go to Iraq, and then with Chelsea Manning, it was Courage to Resist that really got a lot of citizen activism going on that. Well, let us ask you specifically about your decision in Gulf War I not to go to Iraq or Kuwait or wherever they were going to send you. Where were you going, and then what happened to you when you sat down on the tarmac in Honolulu?
There's a lot of context, I guess. I'd served 4 years active duty, and I was stationed at Kaneohe Bay, over in your neighborhood, for the last 2 years of that. And I went from joining the Marine Corps to really wanting to kill bad guys. I had this vision of traveling the world and killing bad guys. And I really got off on singing songs of blood and death and justified spoils of war, and being very excited by that. And then traveling the world and seeing a lot of poor people, a lot of people who didn't really have a say in the way their governments were working, including over a year and a half in Okinawa, Japan, and in the Philippines and South Korea. And then learning about what our country was doing in Nicaragua and El Salvador at the time, and realizing I felt more sympathetic to the people that we were saying were the bad people in Central America. And then learning that I might be deployed to save El Salvador from the FMLN guerrillas, or go in and overthrow the Sandinistas at the time in Nicaragua. And I sort of came to a conclusion that I'm just not going to do that. And I was also artillery, and they're training me on the nuclear artillery rounds. And that got me thinking, well, I'm never going to do this. If they ever ordered me to set the fuse on a nuclear artillery round, I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. But then when I realized that I'm not going to do that, then I'm like, well, should I doesn't make sense to shoot my, M50 machine gun, or even my M16, or and that got me down a path of like, well, actually, I don't want to kill anybody, 20,000 people with a nuclear artillery round, or one poor guy that I actually am more sympathetic to, possibly in Central America. So I had already checked out. I wasn't really a Marine anymore. I was just pretending. I was going through the motions, looking to get out. And a few weeks before my discharge, Iraq invades Kuwait, and I'm stop lost. And I'm promised that quote unquote, that I would, we would go over there and kill the ragheads, and I would set the nuclear fuse to make them all glow. And that triggered that triggered me to say, no, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to refuse, and whatever come. And I guess I wanted people to know that, well, somebody, at least one person, said no to that craziness, and that's why I publicly spoke out and faced 5 years in prison. So luckily, the people of Hawaii, enough of them rallied to my defense. And after spending a month or two in the Pearl Harbor brig, the military decided to stop my court-martial, give me no other than honorable discharge, and get rid of me as fast as they could, in large part to minimize growing protests there in Hawaii and Honolulu, and get rid of me at the same time. So things worked out pretty well for me, but it was obviously it was a life-changing experience for me, and I'm glad I had the support to get through it.
Well, thank you very much. And here in Hawaii, some of those same people that rallied for you in 1992 or 93 are still hard at work here, trying to challenge the militarization of Hawaii. I'd like to now go to my co-author, Susan Dixon, who's over on the Big Island of Hawaii, and asked Susan. I met her first as when she was a lecturer at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, and was teaching a course in the War of the Geography of War and Peace. That's what it was. And she asked me to come speak about it. And then I showed her all the materials I was collecting on dissent, and she bailed me out when I was unable to. I was floundering, drowning in all the materials I'd collected, and couldn't get them together. And she came to the rescue, postponed her PhD thesis for a year, and helped us write the Dissent Voices of Conscience. And she went from the University of Hawaii in Manoa to Australia and taught there for a while, and now is back to the Big Island. And Susan, we're so glad you're back. And please, would you introduce our next guests?
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks, Anne. So I'll be introducing both Kevin and Ricky. And at first I was thinking I'll just introduce you one at a time, but then the more I was reading through and thinking about your statements and your actions, I thought it makes a lot more sense just to introduce you both and kind of give a sense of what you all did, just very, very briefly, but also some of the themes that came out of your statements and out of your actions. So just very, very briefly, both Kevin and Ricky served in the U.S. Army. Kevin was a mechanic, Ricky was an interrogator. And before or as they're joining the military, they both viewed military service as something honorable, something where they could defend their country from attacks, or, to defend our own freedom. But both of them, while they were serving in Iraq, they both were really disturbed by some of the horrors of war, and also by the abuses of power by US troops without any accountability. So in seeing what war actually was on the ground, and kind of like you said, Jeff, about seeing lots of poor people as you were traveling around doing your military service, it felt very similar to that. So both of them, because of their experiences serving in Iraq in the earliest years of the war, they both struggled with their consciences and decided they could no longer serve. They both went to prison. They were both dishonorably discharged. And then in Kevin's statement, for example, one of the questions I thought that really stood out was, why do we tell our kids not to solve their differences with violence and then turn around and commit the ultimate in violence in Iraq? Another part was about how incredibly destructive war is on so many levels. And that reminded me of a great quote that goes, one can no more win a war than win an earthquake. And it also, you were bringing up questions of what is honorable. Both of you did. Is it honorable to train US soldiers to shoot to kill people who haven't done anything to you or probably have nothing to do with their country's leaders' policies and politics? And Ricky again was asking questions like, what is right? What is honorable? And came to view the war in Iraq as a war of aggression without any legal basis. And he also was struggling with abuses of power without accountability. And so I guess from there, I kind of thought of several different things. One is the idea that conflict is inevitable, but violence isn't. And why don't we get taught how to resolve conflict in peaceful ways or constructive ways? You know, we learn a lot of other things. A lot of times people give nonviolence about 2 weeks, or peace about 2 weeks to see if it'll work, and then go back to what they've always tried. But we can actually be taught real skills of peacemaking, peace building, and conflict resolution. There's another saying that is, one of my professors was asked, will there ever be peace? And he would always respond by saying, well, that's the wrong question. What if you substitute the word health for peace? So will there ever be health all over? Well, not really, but we'll still try for it. So instead of seeing peace as black and white or 100% or not, which also just led me to the idea of how President George W. Bush would say, you know, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And then there was another quote that he gave back in June 2002 about 9/11. And he said, a lot of young people say, well, why America? Well, why would anybody want to come after us? And the answer, according to him, is because we love freedom. That's why. And they hate freedom. So that whole sense of, you know, black and white sort of view of seeing the world. And then lastly, one thing I was thinking about was kind of that idea of the stated reasons of going to war, like revenge for 9/11 or, you know, protecting national security or whatever, versus some of the reasons that aren't so obviously stated. And that led me to another idea about how peace can only happen when profit is removed from waging war. So just kind of brought me all over the place. And I wanted to thank all three of you for what you did and what you, even though you knew the consequences that you could face, you still chose to do it. And it seemed from the things I was reading last night that you felt at peace with your decisions, even though you knew you could likely go to prison, you knew you could be court-martialed, and you still did what you did. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you. Kevin, why don't we start with you and ask you to give a little more description and more of your feelings, and then what life has been like since, you know, in the, gosh, almost, what is it, 15 years that you have been out of the military? Please go ahead.
I was originally officially released on 1 January of 2008. That was when the ETS, well, the bad conduct discharge was in full effect. But to go back to the beginning, they kept changing the timeline on us to be deployed over there, because I started hearing about it in 2002. You know, get ready to be deployed. You're going next month. You're going next month. And they come out and told us that every month. And while I was taking the primary leadership development courses, when they started really pushing it to say that we're going to be deployed. But anyway, skipping forward to March of 2003, when we were finally deployed, and we get to Kuwait and we're setting up all of our equipment, making sure everything is fully combat loaded so we can cross into Iraq, and started moving. moving north, we eventually wound up to the northwest, the northeast of the Crit. But on the road north through there, we passed a lot of places that were just destroyed, and I'll never forget the young girl I saw on the highway with her arm burned, charred black up to her, almost to her shoulder, and she was standing there with her, I don't know, her aunt or her mother, an older woman, and we just passed her on by, and that was one of the first things that kind of struck me, is about how inhumane war can be. There was a young girl, I have no idea how old she was, about 9 or 10, I suppose. We just left her there suffering. And excuse me. And some of the other things, that just the way we conducted the war in general, it was like, are people really this incompetent? Because we never saw anybody that was a military fighting force that we engaged in. It was going to people's homes early in the morning, 3 a.m., and grabbing them up out of bed and snatching them up and tying them, putting bags on their head and sending them back to, not a combatant's enclosures or cages, I guess is what you would really say. I mean, it was a prison, but it was basically just a cage. I was involved in that, and that time I was thinking, I cannot believe my country actually wants me to go in here as a professional soldier and harass and snatch civilians out of their homes. That was just, I could not believe that they even asked me to do anything of that nature. And so the more we went and the crazier things got, it was just, I could no longer, after I came back from all of that madness, I could no longer go back, because there was no reason for us to invade Iraq at all, period. None of the people there had any animosity. Well, I won't say none of them, but most of the people there had no animosity toward us. And the thing that I noticed from a lot of the people there was, most of them were just indifferent, and I believe they wanted to just be left alone and didn't want us bothering, coming in and telling them how to live their lives in their country. And also, they didn't want to be stuck up against Saddam and his stuff anymore. But we provided no help for those people over there, and generally speaking. And I don't know, I just could not in good conscience go back and participate in anything of that nature where we were fighting. We weren't even fighting a military force. We were harassing the civilian population of that country. And as I said, I couldn't understand that my country had ever asked me to do anything like that, because I had never in my life thought that a professional soldier or service member would. It was just beneath I don't know what the dignity of the position, I guess you could say, if you understand what I'm trying to say. But I don't know. And then they, once I got back here and told them I wasn't going to redeploy in 2004, that's when they called us and started trying to say that I was deserted, disobeyed a direct order, disrespected a superior commissioned officer. Oh, and they charged me with embezzling and all kind of crazy stuff. They were just trying to put me in prison for 7 years at any rate. And that, again, has made me realize that the image they want to put forth in the military and the reality of it, those are two different pictures. And it would take me a lot longer than my allotted time to discuss this, because I could go on. But suffice it to say that I never thought that I would be sent to a place like that. And once I got over there and saw how inhumane we had to be to each other, I can no longer take part of it. So I refuse to redeploy with it in 2004. And so as a result of all that, I did wind up spending 15 months in prison. They charged me with missing movement by design. Gave me a 50.5 months sentence with a dishonorable discharge, which subsequently upgraded to a bad conduct discharge. But I really don't know. I mean, if anyone had a question they'd like to ask after Ricky talks, I could go in a little more detail if you want.
Okay, well, that'd be great. Thank you very much, Kevin. That was a very moving description of the horrors of war. They really are, and not wanting to participate in that anymore. That's for sure. Boy. Well, why don't we go on to Ricky and ask Ricky to describe what he went through in his decision to say, no, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. Ricky, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, just it's great to have this type of like panel discussion. It's fun for me being able to look back and know it was stories like Kevin Benderman's, that really empowered myself and other resistors later to make those decisions. And it was through platforms like Courage to Resist, where those were really, that direct line support was there. So just much appreciated. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, I mean, with my experiences, it was, noted in the book on some of the, my timeline of a little bit of how that went. But so, I mean, in a nutshell, yeah, like lots of service members, I enlisted after 9/11, and as an interrogator, my training was 18 months long. So actually, by the time I got out of my schooling, the last weekend we were in our training in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, we ended up out at camp for a week, and they brought in a newspaper and showed us that, that within 48 hours, we were going to be going into Iraq. And so that was really surprising for a lot of us that felt like, how are we now here? And it was just kind of, going through your training and you go along with it. So yeah, I mean, once I got deployed and saw firsthand, the brutalities of war and saw some of the abuse of power that goes on, it wasn't long before I started to realize that, American violence was creating the insurgency that we were trying to fight. And it felt very conflicting to me when I was over there. And then once I got home, I really tried to dive into understanding the war and understanding foreign policy in general. So when I got back, I was in a unique position where I had about 4 months where I was doing my language training. So I didn't have to do my daily type of interactions with my unit. I had a little more freedom. And when I would go back to my barracks, for the next 3 to 4 months, I was just desperately seeking answers. I was reading a bunch, stumbling on authors that I'd never heard about that were just blowing my mind and, completely shattering my worldview. And so through those few months, it really became clear to me that it wasn't even just about the military's situation in Iraq, but that I was in a moral dilemma where I felt like I could no longer serve as a military member at all. The more I learned and pieced together, the history of our country and learning about proxy wars and foreign policy and economic imperialism and all these things that have kind of teed up the current events of today, I felt like I couldn't do anything in the military and be okay with it. They offered to send me to a unit where I would just train people, and I didn't see the logic in that. So I eventually ended up, realizing that I knew that the conscientious objector status was not, appropriate to me. I ended up just, I tried to go through it and figure out my options, and I ended up just having this, like a series of anxiety attacks, and ultimately just knew that I needed to not be in this environment for my own well-being. And so I ended up leaving AWOL. I was gone for a little over a year. I think I turned myself in like a week before Kevin got released in 2006 at the Veterans for Peace conference in Seattle. And then I was sent back to my unit, court-martialed. I was sentenced to 13 months in the brig. and made a pretrial agreement that I would only serve 3 months. They basically didn't want to open up any of the items of discussion in trial that I was basing my decisions on. So they wanted to kind of keep that under wraps. So yeah, I went to Camp Lejeune, was there for 3 months and then released. And then I don't know if you want me to talk a little bit about like post that, or if you want to leave that kind of open for discussion or something.
Well, why don't you go ahead and mention what you've been going through since you got out of the Army?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of veterans, it's very challenging, right? I mean, just to find your place back now in society is really difficult, especially when you're not only, administratively suffering the consequences of those decisions, like a bad conduct discharge or bad conduct or dishonorable, where, we literally lost our GI money for school. We lost all veteran benefits. So completely ostracized from that community, which has this whole other mental and emotional impact as well. I was really active in the anti-war community for a couple of years right afterwards, mostly because I was just angry. I was mad and frustrated, and I wanted to give a platform to my experiences and other people as well. And I went around, I spoke at some conferences and different, protests and stuff, and was involved for a little while. And really, I just started getting burnt out and realizing that I needed to heal. And I was kind of just running on empty and running on that like anger and frustration. And so, like a lot of veterans I know, I ended up kind of pulling back from activism in that way. And really, for a couple of years, just went through my own healing that I was needing to go through. I started doing landscaping and learning about permaculture. And it really just, I started, learning about Gaia theory and learning, about from, being in the military and then, being trained to kill. Now, the more I learned about the military, but then how the military and industrial complex is tied to all these economic policies that have led to, this network of chaos around the globe that's, now leading to like the ecological crisis of what we're seeing and how all that's tied in. It was, for a while, I was so like paralyzed by what to do that it was really difficult. And I felt like anything I do as a citizen is like, I thought that being out of uniform would be great and that I wouldn't have to be in war anymore. But then I realized, even with the way that I shop and my money and my tax dollars are still, so I felt really crippled for a while. And it was through learning about permaculture and through kind of reconnecting to the rhythms, of the earth and my own relationship to the land that I really started experiencing, what real peace is. And so from there, it kind of opened me up to a new process of healing and growing. And my approach became, less, this top-down approach to systemic change and really understanding like a bottom-up community-based approach to how to be an agent of change. And so I got involved in some different, local groups and got to help design like a food forest here in Tacoma, have designed like community gardens, have done a number of grants in our neighborhood where we've done different projects. And so for me, I have found a different way to take on empire that is really satisfying and gratifying. And I think that through my, I ended up going back to school. I lost my school money, but I ended up going back, and through permaculture, I became, very interested in the ecological crisis and then what to do about it. Permaculture is a very solutions-based approach. So there were some similarities between permaculture design and some projects I was doing in urban planning. And so an interest in urban planning led me back to school, and I graduated in 2016 in sustainable urban development. And now I work for the city of Tacoma as an urban planner, doing some of this work, climate action planning on a local level and trying to, address some of those issues in the sphere of influence that I feel like I can. So that's, I guess, some of the ways that I've, wrestled with that and then found kind of peace and healing through that. I think that, especially in the anti-war community, there's a lot of mention about fighting the good fight and, standing in solidarity with all of our, brothers and sisters around the world that are fighting, this struggle. And there's not enough conversation about healing. And so I think that's something that I feel really passionate about, that, making space for those conversations and also trying to, introduce ways to do that. Garrett, the director of Veterans for Peace now, a few years ago, I had an opportunity to work with a professor at University of Washington on trying to create a natural program to be able to quantify the benefits of nature and being outside. And so we were doing a hiking study where the department, the Veterans Department was looking to pilot this program where they could start assigning outdoor activities to veterans as a way to provide alternative medicine. And I think that so those are just some of the things I feel less compelled and drawn into a lot of the activism I was before, and I really feel called to be a peacemaker and a bridge builder in a different way now. So it's really it's been exciting to through that journey. It's been long and it's been hard, and so I mean, in all the different ways, thank you for everybody who's supported, not just myself, but all of us that have been on this really long, grueling journey since we've made those decisions, because sometimes they felt really unnoticed and you feel alone a lot of the time. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Wow. That's, the whole issue of activism and how quickly people get involved in it right after they've come out of these terrible situations, pardon me, the military has gotten them into, and then how intense it is and how you burn out so quickly. I'm glad you brought that up, because we know of so many people who have gone down that same path for the right reasons and have had to draw back. And I'm glad that you found your spot for healing and peace, and congratulations on getting the job with the city to help beautify the city and make it a better place. That's great. And then I'll go back to Kevin for just a minute. Kevin, what have you been up to? How has your transition been from the military back into civilian life? Let's see, I think you're muted, Kevin.
Is that better?
Yeah, better, thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry. Well, I would like to say that at this point in time, I still have this feeling that I'm not really sure where I fit in this country anymore, because I'm born and raised in rural Alabama, and you know how Alabama is. And then I wanted to do what was right. And it seems like they're not so concerned with doing what's right as it is just maintaining the status quo, so they won't have to admit a mistake. But it was really rough. I wound up getting a divorce because of all this stuff. It just tore me and my wife apart. And I got out and started driving a truck over the road, and I got to the point where I couldn't even handle that anymore. And Ricky touched on it a little while ago, the anxiety and the depression and the anger, and then being in a semi truck by myself 24 hours a day. I had a lot of time to do it. So currently I am unemployed. I've been drawing disability from the military and through Social Security since 2017. They did officially diagnose me with combat stress, and I've been able to see a counselor for 2 years. They're very constricted on how they approach dealing with these things, and so some of these other organizations, I'm going to need to get in touch with them, like Ricky was saying, doing different things with different organizations and getting a better result. But I basically kind of feel like I'm a man without a country, because I don't know where I fit in anymore, I grew up believing one way because I don't know how many people are entirely familiar with my story, but a family history from the American Revolution and military service. So you can imagine the stories I was told and how I looked at it. And then going from that to realizing that what we were doing was just entirely wrong. It was inhumane. We had no business going over there, blowing up those people's houses, homes, businesses. And I don't know, it's just, I live with it, but I still am in a place where I don't fully understand it or can accept it, that my country would do this. And so, but personally, as far as I go, I'm maintaining, I've been kind of staying away from a lot of people because I found it easier to isolate than it is to go out and try to interact in the world. Because so many people, they'll say thank you for your service, and it's like they're well intentioned, but that's a platitude that means nothing to me. You know, serving members get the short end of the stick all the time, and thank you for your service just doesn't match the sacrifices they made. And especially on the ones that come to realize that they were being used, such as Ricky and Jeff and a host of other, Camilla Mejia. And now we got Reality Winner that found out she was being used, and they still messing with her. And I just can't believe, you know, truth, justice, and the American way. My country always told me that. And everything that we did in Iraq was a lie, and it was injustice. And if that's the American way, then I'm not sure I want to subscribe to it anymore.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head on that, Kevin, that there's a lot that we don't subscribe to. And we certainly appreciate your, telling us how difficult it's been. It's not an easy road after you've taken these acts of conscience to move on. And sometimes you find a niche, and sometimes you haven't yet found a niche. But I know that you will. You will. There's no doubt about that. Indeed. And we have, before we open it up for questions, we have one member of our group, Jim Bearden, who wrote me and told about his experience. He's a Vietnam era person, and he filed for conscientious objector status. And Jim, would you want to tell us about that? Go ahead and unmute yourself, Jim. Thank you.
Yes, I'll tell you a little bit about it. I don't want to tell the whole story. I don't think we have time. In the late 1960s, I was working at graduate school at the University of Pittsburgh, working on a PhD in biophysics. I was also a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army, having gone through the ROTC training when I was an undergraduate at Rice University. I think I responded to Kennedy's ask what you can do for your country the same way that John Kerry did. I'm the same age as he is, but he's, of course, a lot taller and richer than I am. So when I got my commission, when I graduated, though, they deferred me from any active duty because I was going to graduate school. So a couple of years along, 2 or 3 years, I started wondering, the other thing is I was not qualified for any of the combat branches because my eyes were so bad. In fact, even combat support branches like the engineers, which is what most of the guys at Rice that I was in ROTC with went into. So they had scheduled me to go into the Ordnance Corps, which of course is the branch that's responsible for developing new weapons. And a few years along, working on a PhD in biophysics, I got to worrying a little bit about exactly what kind of new weapons I might be asked to develop with a degree like that, probably biological or chemical weapons. And I got a little worried about that, not really wanting to be a part of those kind of weapons. So I first applied for branch transfers. I was trying to get into something like Medical Service Corps, served my time there. Got turned down for all of those. And I found out after I met a Quaker minister in Pittsburgh that it was possible to apply for conscientious objector status, even though I was already in the Army, which I didn't even know until then. So I went through the whole application process. As any of you know that have done it, it's a very lengthy process, lots of interviews and forms and everything else to fill out. In the end, finally got it. Actually, they said, we'll let you resign your commission if you want to. And so I escaped a lot of the consequences that the other people we've heard from have had, a lot of the negative things. They just let me leave without any consequences. So I was much more fortunate than a lot of other people are. And I guess that's about it.
Okay, well, thank you, because you bring up, something that we can always tell other people about. If you see that you have friends that are in the military that are saying, I can't take this anymore, that while filing for a conscientious objection status is a lengthy process and a difficult one, it is one avenue that people have used. And in fact, we've had several, it's possible, several Marines here in Hawaii in the last few years have used that and have been successful at it. So it's a strategy that we should for sure alert friends and acquaintances that may say, I don't want to do this anymore at all. Well, we thank all three of our presenters and Jim for offering his comments. So why don't we now, we've got some time for questions, and let's see if you'll just either put the little hand up, the little yellow hand, or your actual hand up. Okay, I see one. Oh, wait a minute, there's a hand that went up a minute ago, but then it went down. Let's see. Yeah, Susan, please go ahead.
I just want to thank everyone for these stories of conscience, these brave stories of conscience. I respect them so much. As an educator who wants to bring your stories to the classroom, I just wonder if that's an option for any of you. I can put my email in the chat. I'd like to be able to try to get funding for you to come to my class and speak. I teach at two institutions in New York. One is a community college in Nassau County, Long Island. The other is Adelphi University in Garden City, New York. I teach Introduction to Peace Studies, and I try to bring veterans and folks like yourself who have these stories to share with students that are very valuable. And I did one for WBAI last year with the organization We Are Not Your Soldier. So I just, especially hearing Kevin's, some of the challenges you're describing, I just wondered right off the bat, could I be of any assistance? Very little assistance, I realize, but to offer that opportunity where there might be some funding available, if you were able or willing to share your story. And I realize it's not easy to do so publicly when there has been stress and anxiety and trauma. So the veterans that did come to my class last year, I know it was challenging in some ways, but I think it was also very affirming for them and for my students. So I just wanted to throw that out there to see if any of you had any interest. And if so, I would put my contact info in the chat.
Well, since you asked me first, I'm going to say, yeah, I could do that, but we just have to, were you on when I gave out my number? You can contact me directly that way, or Ann has my email also. So.
Okay, great. I might have come on a few minutes late and missed that. So thank you for that. And I can also connect you if you wanted with We Are Not Your Soldier, who is really looking nationwide, I think, for folks like yourself who have this courageous story to share and a way to compensate you for it. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, well, thank you. And I will say this, for a long time, I felt like I didn't want to be around a lot of people or deal with anyone in any ways, but here the past year or so, I do feel like I'm ready to kind of reach out on a limited basis and see how well I react to it. But yeah, I can do that. I can
Thank you.
try it. You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
Ricky, how about you? Would you want to be in touch with Susan?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, just as I would find out more info as, you know, I can oftentimes fit stuff like this into my day and manage around it. But I mean, really, I'm interested in the opportunity to talk about the intersectionality of war and specifically how it relates to like the climate crisis and some of these other issues that are really connected. So yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, I'll make sure that all of your details are connected with each other. Thank you very much for that, Susan. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And how about other questions or comments? David Brookbank. If you'll unmute yourself, David.
Yes, I want to thank both of you fellows. I was really honestly brought to tears by your words. I am the son of a nuclear carrying B-52 pilot, now deceased, my father, but I was appointed to the U.S. Air Force and Naval Academies in 1976 and basically melted down before I went and was, in bed, in a bad state when the commander of the Air Force Academy called and asked if I was showing up. And I had to tell my father I wasn't going. And I spent a lot of years homeless on the streets and dealing with a lot of issues. I basically found my way back through opposition to the U.S. policies in Central America, forming a El Salvador Solidarity Committee at the University of Washington in 1979. But I still understand. I feel the feelings you must feel, sir, from Alabama in particular, in a line of military people, the shame and the loss, the disorientation, basically, the things that person goes through. And I know you came to terms with it through what you saw. I was always haunted by the image of a girl running down the road in Vietnam, burning with napalm myself. And I think that's why I had my meltdown in 1976. But I wanted to ask you guys about what do we do about, the young 17, 18-year-old who thinks he's going to go to the military academy or is going to follow in his father's footsteps, or in your case, a whole line of people going back to the beginning of the country.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I would like to say one thing on that. In the military contract, there's a clause in there that says to the needs of the military. So that supersedes any other promises they made to you. It's in that contract, and that will override any other promise of duty station or promise of military occupational specialty that they offer. And they need to really take that into consideration before they go in. And they need to realize too that the military is about, if you take all the bells and whistles off of it, the bottom line of it is it's for killing. It's a killing force to be able to kill people.
Thank you. Hey, Douglas, Doug Loomis in Okinawa, could you mute your computer, please? Okay. Ricky, would you like to respond?
I guess briefly, I would say, what we can do is support, anti-recruitment efforts. There's groups across the nation in different ways that are doing that, and really calling out the military and getting them out of our schools. And then, even supporting groups like Courage to Resist and the GI Rights Hotline, because the thing is that these troops that are, going into contracts and going entering into the service, they're going to be dealing with a lot of, this is a lot of heavy stuff, reckoning with, the false narratives that were fed and the lies that were told and the cultural conditioning that we've been experiencing, right, that have really deeply flawed our understanding of what's happening around us. So I think to just know how to support people when they choose to reach out is really important. So those types of like GI Rights Hotline, for example, when you know, when people are feeling like they need that, they're the most susceptible to, suicide and stuff like that. But they're also most vulnerable and willing to be, nurtured into a safer space. So I think that those are really two great things that can do to kind of combat that.
Thank you. Let's see. I think we had, let's see, more hands. Was it Lynn? Did you have your hand up?
Hey, if I could add one quick thing to that Ricky just said, there's the Center of Conscience and War in DC with Bill Galvin and Maria Santelli. There's some good people to contact, and they have a lot of good information also for younger people.
Great, thank you.
And resources.
All I was going to say, and I don't know how much this adds, but to hear Kevin and others say, I was a man without a country, but I'm a man with a soul. I just can't. It's so important. What's happening here tonight is so important, because a country without a soul, a country without following its own constitution, it's just so off base. And I bow down to everybody on this conversation tonight, because you are truth tellers, you're truth listeners, you are people with a soul, which is so much greater than anything we could ever talk about. That's it.
Well, thank you, Lynn. That's, I think you sum up the feelings that all of us have on this panel for our three panelists that have been here, our three friends that have been here telling about what happened to them. I'll mention that I did reach out to several other people, several other war resistors, and some of them said, yeah, I'll be glad to be on later on. Some said, though, I can't do that. I just can't do it. My life is not something I even want to talk about right now.
Wow.
So I really do appreciate the fact that Jeff, Ricky, and Kevin have been so open with us and, giving us a feel of what it's like to take these very dramatic steps to say to your military and essentially the leadership of your country, you guys don't know what the hell you're doing, and I'm not going to do it because I have a conscience, I have a soul, and screw you, I'll take whatever comes. And so we really do thank you. We have time for a couple of more questions if people have questions or comments. Any others? Susan, would you like to? Well, wait just one second. Jeff has something. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, before I miss my chance, for the last couple of years, I've been producing a podcast series of firsthand accounts of resistors from the Vietnam War up to the current day. I've created about 75 episodes, and I just want to make that plug. So courageresist.org/podcasts, or on your favorite podcasting platform, Courage to Resist.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that, Jeff?
Yeah, courageresist.org is our website for Courage to Resist, and /podcasts. You'll find all of our podcasts I've produced.
Thank
and
you.
I'm going to be asking David and Ricky and Jim and Kevin to be guests on upcoming episodes. So you've been warned.
We could do that.
And we'll put in here, and I'll also put that into our summary and our alert for the next session, and the link that we'll have to this recording. And if there's anything that, Kevin, Ricky, and Jeff, you'd like for us to put into that, besides, for example, the podcast, please let me know, and we'd be glad to put it in. And Susan, how about from your perspective, what are your comments?
Do you mean me, Susan, or Susan, other Susan?
Susan Dixon, co-author of Dissent, Voices of Conscience.
Sorry. I feel like, yeah, I'm kind of just blown away. Even though I know about your stories, it's just almost devastating to imagine what that does to you and how long that stays with you in different ways. And Ricky, I think the things that you've done, like the ways that you've found to found healing and then found ways to help other people, and looking at the intersectionality of things like war and climate change. I just think you've done an incredible job. And I can't even imagine how gut-wrenching it would be to face some of these things. And Kevin, that sense of, I mean, I kind of felt the same way, like when I realized, wait, I've been lied to, you know, this country I got raised on, these are the slogans. What do you mean we don't follow any of them? So
Right.
it's devastating to have that realization. And then for me, at least, I kind of went to what else did they lie about? So it just, but I can't imagine for you just the kind of things that you struggle with on a daily basis and wonder where you fit in. So my long-winded thing is thank you very much for everything you've done for all of our speakers today.
Indeed. Bruce Shea has a
Thank you.
hand up. Bruce, would you like to say something?
Yes. Hey, everybody. Thanks for all the participation here. Question is for Kevin. I've long felt uncomfortable saying thanks for your service to anyone, mainly because I'm not thankful for killing people in their civilians in their homes, and I'm just curious, Kevin, is it I wouldn't say that to anybody, but I also have sympathy for what people have gone through. What is it when you encounter these types of situations where you run across a veteran? If I were to come to you, what would you want me to say? Would you want me to not acknowledge it at all, or I'm curious as to what if any recognition you want at all?
The millions of veterans that are out there, I can only speak for myself, but if you were to come across me, I would just as soon hear you say, good morning, how are you? If you found out I'm a veteran, because nothing that I did in Iraq was an honorable action. So there's nothing for you to thank me for. I didn't protect your democracy or my democracy. All we did was go over there and destroy an entire nation and ruin any chance that they ever had of having a democracy, if they wanted one. So, like I said, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I would prefer you don't say that to me. And I do have people say it, and I just kind of smile and, okay, I don't want to get into it with them, but no, I would prefer not to hear it personally.
One thing I say when somebody says, thank you for your service, I say, well, quite honestly, I think I've done more for peace since I've been out of the Army than what I did in the Army. And that kind of, they're taken aback a bit, but I've never had anybody that said, well, you're a stupid idiot for that.
All right. No, I didn't.
Well, with that, I think let's give a big round of applause to our three fine folks, war resistors, for all of what you've been through, for your conscience and for our conscience. And next week will be our last in our series of 4 sessions for this book club sponsored by World Beyond War. And we'll be having, I think we'll have at least one more war resistor, and then we're going to have some whistleblowers that came after we published this book, because there are so many people who have blown the whistle on various things. And I'll, as soon as I get a confirmation, I'll send you the name of the person and some info about them so that you can read up on them, so that you'll know about who they are. But we really appreciate very much Jeff and Ricky and Kevin being with us today, and Jim's comment and David's comment about their association with the militaries. We thank you very, very much, and thank you for your conscience. I'll just say it that way. So with that, we again appreciate very much for everyone being here in the 3rd session of Dissent Voices of Conscience. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your conscience.
That's right.
Thank you to everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Colonel Ann.
Good night.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Be safe.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone from Japan with us today. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.